The truth's around here somewhere. Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about the X-Files Season 1 Episode 16. It's called Young at Heart. So, spoilers for the episode as always. This one is about an old case of Mulder's, one that he has regret over, where the perp seemingly died in prison 4 years before this episode, but all of a sudden there's all these notes being left, there's people being killed, and it seems like it's coming from this guy, this murderer that Mulder helped put away a few years ago. And when I read the description for this one last time, I said it sounded like it was interesting. We were playing with similar ideas to the previous episode. What's funny is that as the episode unfolds, you realize that it's not similar at all to the last episode. The idea that he's dead and somehow come back as a ghost or something like that is a red herring. It's actually something else, which is good. It's interesting. I enjoyed the mad scientist stuff in this one. The opening of the episode is like a flashback to when the guy supposedly died, but he's been worked on in the the prison doctor's room, and this scientist is like doing stuff on him. His arm's been cut off, and he's got these weird eyes, and that kind of sets up the story that we're going to get later on. So I had fun with that. I think overall I enjoyed this. I have a couple of nitpicks. I think there's one really weird choice towards the end from the villain that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But other than that, I thought there was some good creepy scenes in this one. I enjoyed the pulpy mad scientist stuff, like I said. The experimentation that he seemingly was doing. Once it was digging into that stuff, I was having a lot of fun with it. But there's a couple of good creepy kind of like just standalone moments as well. The episode gets going with a murder at a jewelry store, and there's a note that's been left for Mulder, which looks like a note that he used to receive from this killer. I'll be honest, I don't think I ever actually read any of the notes because they're all in like handwriting, like cursive, and I no, I'm not even like I can barely make out that at the best of times, to be honest. But it didn't really affect anything in the episode though. Mulder immediately is like shaken by the fact that this seems like this guy who, you know, on top of everything else, Mulder feels guilt because he didn't take a shot when he had a chance with this guy, and this guy, Barnett is his name, went on to kill an FBI agent. So Mulder feels guilty about this. It was like his first big case after he got out of Quantico, and when he first became an agent, this was his first big thing. And while he helped catch the guy, he did also get cold feet about shooting him, and it led to someone's death, as well as a hostage as well. So he's feeling that. And I think it's interesting that Mulder is convinced that it's him. Like, he feels it in his gut, and he's seeing this evidence. We get introduced to another agent named Purdue, who worked with Mulder on the case back then. And he seems quite understanding. He seems like he's a good guy that's friends with Mulder. But he's like, dude, this guy died in prison. It can't be him. But Mulder's convinced it is. And I think what was interesting about this episode is that Mulder doesn't jump to any like wacky X-Files conclusions. Obviously, this Purdue character and even Scully, when they hear about like Mulder being convinced that it's still this killer Barnett, they obviously doubt him, and they think that, you know, and Purdue even says that, oh, is this spooky Mulder stuff I've been hearing about? Like, I didn't really take it seriously, but this sounds a bit wacky. But, and maybe this is just my perspective as a viewer, because I've seen how quickly Mulder jumps to weird supernatural or paranormal shit in every other episode. Last episode I was complaining that he was like jumping to conclusions really quickly. Here he never actually does. He never outright says he thinks he's a ghost, or he thinks he's undead, or he thinks anything like that. He's just saying, no, the evidence is telling me he's the one doing this. Like, so something must be incorrect about the records of him dying. The records say that he was cremated after a heart attack, and that's what it says. But it turns out later in the episode, the simplest explanation, and this is very unlike X-Files, the simplest explanation, which is he didn't actually die, and that was a falsified report, turns out to be the case. Hey, problem solved. Now, that's not to say there's not some X-Files stuff going on in this, because there is. Just not with the death, right? There was no death. He's alive because there was no death, right? There's a really nice little line, though, actually, when Mulder reiterates once again, sort of middle of the episode, give or take. He says to Scully that he's still convinced that it's him, that he's back and he's after Mulder. And Scully says something along the lines of, "You mean as a ghost?" And Mulder looks her straight in the eyes and says, "I thought you didn't believe in ghosts, Scully." Now, this is a typical line in the X-Files, where they'll be talking about something, he has a crazy theory, she'll maybe say the word before he does, and he'll kind of make a little, almost passive-aggressive little dig, like, "Oh, I thought you didn't believe in that, Scully." That's been something they've done before. But what I liked about this, I liked this for two reasons. One was Mulder's demeanor. He was not cracking a joke. Not really. He was dead serious as he said it. Like, he was not in a joking mood this episode. Once he realized that he was dealing with this killer Burnett, he was not even entertaining joking around from that point on. But the other reason why I like it, and I think this line has a lot more, this little exchange has a lot more weight to it, purely because of what Scully's been through in the last few episodes. I think if you are watching these in order, like I say you should, with all TV shows, quite frankly, then, and you've been paying attention, and you had the episode with Scully's dad, last episode was the agent who was kind of possessed by the other dead guy in her head, and I'm not saying she necessarily believed that to be the truth necessarily by the end. She was probably convincing herself that he was just delusional or something, that it wasn't real. I think Mulder asking the question, "I thought you didn't believe in ghosts," and it just being an awkward beat where she doesn't like quit back a line. She doesn't say something to deflate the tension. She doesn't sort of make fun of him in return. She doesn't have a snappy comeback. She's just kind of quiet for a second. And I like that because after these experiences of the last few episodes, there's kind of some genuine, I think, doubt that ghosts are fake, or you know what I mean. Like, I think there's some genuine seeds of like maybe there is some kind of ghosts or some kind of afterlife, because it feels like recently she's had a couple of experiences with that, and I think instead of it being something that he's making a little quip about and then she quips back like they've been doing since episode 1, this was more like he was pushing a button that he knew was going to be a pressure point, and it was a pressure point. Scully didn't come back from it immediately. She sort of it sort of felt like it hit her somewhere, and I thought that was an interesting little detail. I think was rewarding if you've been watching the episodes and you've been paying attention. I like that. So that was good. There's a nice bit early on as well where, well, I say nice, it's kind of stupid because there's no way technology was doing this in 1990. Well, probably 1994 by this point, I think. But he's getting like a computer techie to mock up what this guy might look like now, what Barnett might look like now after 4 years of aging. Maybe he's grown a beard, maybe he's put on weight. And this computer technician's like tapping away at her keyboard and just making it happen on the screen. And I started laughing. I think partly because I remember, of all things, I don't even like this show that much in hindsight. But I used to see a lot of Home Improvement when I was a kid, just because it was on it was on like 2 or 3 different channels, like over the course of my childhood a lot. And there's an episode where they get a computer that can do this, and Tim Allen's wife gets mad at him for checking out what she looks like with bigger boobs. And that's what this made me think of, was a silly joke like that, because it was just the same kind of silly thing where the photo was kind of fading to another version of his face. What I did like about this, though, is that it's kind of a red herring in that Mulder's thinking he's going to be older, but what we actually find out is that he's not older, he's younger. In fact, he's like half his age. You know, he went from being close to 50 to being like in his mid-20s. And that turns out to be the mad science stuff. And I really dug this. Once they started investigating like the doctor at the prison and this prisoner who's saying that no, he definitely didn't die, I saw him blink, all this stuff. They go to a doctor who knows stuff about this doctor, right? This Dr. Ridley, I think his name was, who was doing experiments at the prison. Dr. Ridley was basically, his medical license was taken away at the end of the 70s. He hadn't been like an official doctor for a decade by the time he was working on Barnett at the prison. It was when they started looking into this that I got really into the story, because they go to this other, high-ranking doctor, and they ask him, about this Ridley guy. What was he doing? Why was he? First of all, why was he fired? Why was his medical license revoked and all that stuff? And he explains that he was investigating potential cures to a very rare disease that makes children look like they're much older, look like they're in their 80s or 90s. And then most of the kids will die when they're in single digits. Some might make it to their 20s, but it's pretty much they're going to die. They age very rapidly and then die. Mulder and Scully are asking these questions, and as he's telling the story, it does something I love with these types of like mad science stories, where there's like some old footage of like one of these patients, one of these children walking around, and it's like old school, 8mm film, and it's flickering and it's playing with no sound in the background. It just has really creepy, cool vibes. It's got like proper what deranged experiments went on in the past kind of feeling to it. And I was really digging the mood of this scene and kind of the backstory they were setting up. And they say that this doctor went missing, Dr. Ridley, he disappeared not too long after, and the rumors are that he was continuing his experiments somewhere in South America, but no one really knows for sure. All this stuff I thought was super interesting. I was getting into it. I was having a good time. Later on, this Dr. Ridley just shows up. He shows up at Scully's door because he's heard they've been looking into stuff, I guess. Or that he's heard that Barnett's killing people. And he explains that, he confirms Barnett's not dead. He's alive. In fact, he's kind of my best patient. Like, the Dr. Ridley himself is dying because, well, he's actually de-aged himself a bit. And he's de-aged other patients. They've all basically become sick because they've all got the de-age, because basically he took he reversed the sickness that was making the kids age and reversed it so that he's de-aging people. But unfortunately, all of the other things that come with that for the kids that would eventually kill them, all of these people who have been de-aged also have those as well. So he's actually going towards his grave here. He's got I think he says he's got a month to live when he's talking to Scully and Mulder. But the exception to that is Barnett. Barnett, apparently, for whatever reason, he's had some variations of whatever experiments he was doing, and he's actually fine. Not only that, he did have his arm cut off, and they grew him back an arm. And you see some hints of this earlier in the episode, that he's got a weird, wet hand with some webbing. And it turns out they couldn't grow a human hand. They can never quite figure out how to make that work. But a salamander arm, they could do. So he's got this really disgusting, wet, fishy arm. It's very Creature from the Black Lagoon in a lot of ways. Very gooey. So I loved all this. Hearing all this mad science stuff, I was super into. I liked that the solution to all this wasn't that, because honestly, for the first half of the episode, I was thinking that Barnett was possessing people, which again would be kind of similar to last episode. But you see a close up of the eyes, and they've got cloudy eyes, the people who've had this treatment. And I was thinking that the reason why Barnett was able to get close to Mulder in different locations and leave him notes was because he was just jumping into different people. He was a spirit jumping around. And I'm actually really happy that it turned out not to be that. All this mad science stuff was way more interesting. And it was very different. It feels like it's not like the only time we've had mad science, of course. We had the one with all the clones, and that had some mad science stuff in it. But this was intriguing, and I think on top of that, it added in this idea that once they get all this information, Mulder goes to Deep Throat for more information, because Dr. Ridley kind of implies that, hey, after I got my medical license revoked, I got a lot of bidders wanting me to continue this research, because people kind of want to live forever. People don't want to grow old. It's kind of a big market. And it turns out the US government is one of these entities that were funding his illegal research after the fact. Mulder goes to Deep Throat, and Deep Throat's yeah, of course they want this. Not only do they want his research to try and perfect de-aging people and living forever, because all the value in that, but Barnett, the killer who's stalking Mulder, who's killed other agents, his other friend agent Purdue, who we talked about earlier, he gets killed halfway throughout the episode. So Mulder's in a really bad state right now. His friends are being killed off. It seems like Scully's being targeted to be the next victim. He wants to kill everyone that Mulder cares about. The US government, up top and top secret, are negotiating with Barnett so that he'll hand over all the research. Dr. Ridley's research was all stolen by Barnett. He has it all. So they're negotiating with him and they want it and they care so much about it that they don't care that they're negotiating with a murderer. It sounds like they'll give him amnesty, they'll give him money, they'll give him safe haven, whatever he's wanting, because they want this so bad. And one of the little details that's really nice about this is that later in the episode, after Mulder shoots Barnett at the hospital when they're trying to like save him because he's dying and they've got the defibrillator out and he's on the operating table, the smoking man is in the room and he never looks up. He's always looking down. He's clearly, you can tell that what they're doing here is he's trying to ask him before he dies where the research is because they really want it. And Mulder just says, I think this guy's from the CIA. And Scully kind of looks over, and Scully should recognize him because she's seen him before. But he never looks up, to be fair, though. So I wonder if maybe she didn't quite catch it. Plus, she's also in pain from being shot with a bulletproof vest on, so she's not in a great space. But I did like the way they sold this research as being something that the government and all the secret organizations really, really, really want. I mean, it ties into what Dr. Ridley said himself earlier in the episode. He said that whoever owns the Fountain of Youth controls the world. And if there's one thing we know about the government is they want to control the world. To me, that was like the side of the episode that was really good. I also enjoyed some of the creepier sort of horror moments as well. There's a really interesting choice, actually. So before Ridley shows up, Dr. Ridley, before he shows up to Scully's place, Scully's sitting at her computer and she's doing one of her reports, right? And she's saying out loud what's going on. She hears a noise, and it's this sort of like tense sequence where she grabs her gun and slowly searches around her house before she eventually gets to the front door, and it turns out Dr. Ridley's there waiting. But we, the audience, see that Barnett is hiding in the shadows in like another room, potentially about to jump out at some point. So it's a good, minute maybe. I know it doesn't sound long, but it's long in a 42-minute episode. It's a good minute of her like stalking around the house, kind of tense. It's well shot, and I enjoyed the scene. I think the thing that was stuck out to me about it, though, that was a little bit interesting as a choice, is the music here was different to what it typically has during a suspenseful scene. It sounded almost like something from The Omen. There was like a chanting going on. It was very different to normal, and I thought that was not that's a bad choice, just a different one. It stuck out to me. But I thought I'd mention that. I'll also mention, this has not been something that's popped up that much, actually. I think there's maybe been 2 episodes before that have had 1 or 2 shots like this. But this episode might be the worst one so far for the number of shots that, for whatever reason, they didn't have the original film negatives or whatever it was. So there's a couple of establishing shots, and that's the main thing I've noticed before, is 1 or 2 dodgy establishing shots where it's clearly like blown up from like SD VHS or something like that because they just didn't have the high quality version of that shot. And it's not a big deal. Like, obviously, it's few and far between. The fact that this is only the 2nd or 3rd time that I've really noticed it, it means that it's really not a concern. But it stuck out a little bit in this episode because of one shot. There's a couple of establishing shots, like I said, that look kind of rough, but it's not really that important. The one that sticks out a bit more, though, is that after they talk to the doctor who gives them all this stuff about Ridley and shows them the film of the kid who's old, Scully and Mulder are walking down a hallway, and this entire scene is one shot of them walking and talking, and it looks like shit. It looks terrible. It looks so blurry and whatever else. They clearly just didn't have the original footage of this scene, so they had to use whatever SD crappy old version they had lying around, which is a shame. It's just, it's, again, this is not the sort of thing where I should say they shouldn't have bothered remastering it if they couldn't like fix every shot. No, of course not. Like, if there's a couple of dodgy shots, like, that's fine. We'll live with it because it's nice. It's too good having 99.99% of it looking as amazing as it does. If there's 1 or 2 little shots like this, it's not a big deal. But I thought I'd mention it because I didn't notice it. As far as the Barnett stuff goes, my one sort of bigger nitpick of the episode, I joked a little bit about the technology of the time and all that. Although I did enjoy the scenes of Mulder going to a handwriting expert in the FBI and her kind of analysing these notes and saying, well, they were written recently and they're also matching this guy's handwriting, which is one of the first big kind of like, well, how can that be? He's supposed to be dead. But what I liked about this stuff is there's like some teases here of like, well, there's no fingerprints, but if he was wearing gloves, then the ink wouldn't be smudged the way it is, so that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And what we find out, of course, is that he's writing with his salamander hand, so he's got no fingerprints, but it's still smearing everything. If anything, it's probably smearing it way more than it normally would. But the complaint I have actually is that it's kind of the conclusion to the story, is that throughout the episode, this Barnett is like, he targets an innocent victim to leave a note. He then leaves a note for Mulder in his truck saying that he can be anywhere, he can be anyone. Mulder's never going to see him coming, but he's going to get Mulder and kill everyone he cares about, blah, 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 all that stuff. And we see him kill Agent Purdue. He goes to his house at night and kills him in his bedroom. It seems like he's about to strike and kill Scully right before Dr. Ridley shows up. But obviously that interrupts him. The next day, Scully hears her answering machine being listened to and goes out and checks it, and her messages have already been listened to, and she takes them to Mulder and says, hey, he was in my house, he's listened to this stuff. Barnett's called Mulder a couple of times now to sort of taunt him, and he just did that in this scene. And he's like, okay, what was on the answering tape that would give him information? And she's like, well, I'm going to my niece's cellist recital tomorrow at this fancy place. And they decide to set up a trap. So the big final set piece of the episode is at this sort of theater where they've got a bunch of agents walking around. It turns out Scully's wearing a bulletproof vest, which makes sense once you get shot twice. But my big complaint with this, though, is that we see Barnett skulking around. He's got a gun on him. He's kind of watching for Scully. And that's all fine, but I don't really understand why he chooses to do what he does here, because he just runs out in front of the room full of people. It's like a really busy room. There's tons of guests for this thing. And he just pulls out his gun and tries to shoot Scully in such a manner that there's no possible way that it wouldn't... Like, there's a small chance he might get away, I suppose, if he shoots enough people, but the chances are is that he's probably going to get tackled, or someone's going to stop him, or whatever. He must see that Mulder's there, because he knows Mulder well enough, he'd recognize him. So I just don't understand why he's been stealthily picking people off in like opportune moments throughout the episode, but for some reason he has to like break his cover and put himself at such risk to get to Scully. Like, I'd understand it if it was Mulder, because Mulder is his endgame. Mulder is the one that he's building up to, and that's the one he wants to get revenge on. So I'd at least understand in that case where if he doesn't care about being free afterwards, maybe he would break his cover to just get to Mulder so he can finish things off. Or at least if he cares so much about getting Mulder that he would give himself that amount of risk. But he does it for Scully, and it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And it just leads to kind of a recreation of the shootout where he has a hostage and Mulder has to make the choice to shoot him while he's holding the hostage, which he does, leading to the operating table room scene that we talked about. It was a weird choice. It didn't really track with what he'd been doing the rest of the episode. I don't think they justified this decision. I know that the backstory implied that he was reckless and would take shots at people just out of spite, but he wasn't pushed into a position where he needed to do that, I don't think. So that stuck out as being a little bit weird, and it felt like we just had to wrap up the episode, so they had to have him make this decision so they could end it, which is a shame, but it's probably the biggest negative that I would hand to the episode. The show closes with Mulder and Scully talking about this research that he had that the government was trying to get, and as they're talking about where it could possibly be, we see where it is. It's a storage box or a lockbox at a train station somewhere. And the camera just kind of focuses in on this train station box and cut to black. I thought this was effective. Sometimes they do these endings where they want to end it on a sort of ominous, like, oh, this thing could come back. I like that this wasn't, oh, the killer could come back. This was, no, this thing we've established that he has hidden out there somewhere is still out there. And maybe one day someone's going to find it, and that could be a big deal if they do get their hands on it. So... no, I like the episode for the most part quite a bit, actually. I like the mad science stuff. It had some creepy, tense moments. I enjoyed Mulder being a little bit more serious because he really cares about this thing. The flashback where you see him testifying, I did think was a little hammy. He sort of starts yelling at the end about how much he wants the guy to fry for what he's done. And it does kind of feel like he's not, if it kind of felt like Duchovny was not taking full swings, even though it felt like he was supposed to be like emotional during the scene. So maybe I'm critiquing the performance in that one moment a little bit, but by and large, I thought this was a really just interesting concept of an episode, and I always dig when like something happened in the past that we have just like brief snippets of and vague ideas of what was going on and whatnot, and it does get all kind of answered here. Admittedly, Dr. Ridley shows up and just explains everything, but that feeling of like, oh, what sort of creepy stuff was going on, what sort of concoctions was this guy coming up with, that stuff's quite interesting to me. But that's my thoughts on Young at Heart, episode 16 of season 1. I'll be back next time with EBE. That's the name of the next episode, EBE. Okay, here's the description on IMDb. Mulder and Scully become the focus of a disinformation campaign when they attempt to trace the government secret transport of an alien life form. We're back to an alien. Beware. Yeah, no, sounds like it's bread and butter. We'll see how this one pans out next time. It's got a high rating on IMDb though, so maybe I should be hyped. But yeah, that was a fun one. So let me know what you think of this episode in the comments. Of course, you can like to help out the channel and help people find the show and everything else. You can support Above and Beyond if you go over to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. Help keep the lights on and get some bonuses for your trouble, including exclusive monthly reviews of Columbo if you happen to be a fan of that show. Exclusive bonus episodes of a lot of the movie podcasts that we do over Mail Fuzz Movies. So if all that or any of that sounds interesting, please do go and maybe give it a chance. But that is me. Thank you very much for joining. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?